The night had a strange smell, not the usual scent of the Maple Root diner. Strong coffee, waxed floors, and that sweet blueberry pancake aroma that never fully left the air. It was a dry smell, almost metallic, as if the wind had dragged a piece of silence into the restaurant, something that didn't belong there. Emily noticed it before she even looked at the clock on the wall, whose battery was so old the second hand jumped in little hiccups. 11:47 p.m., almost closing time. The parking lot lights outside had already switched to economy mode, only 3 poles lit, casting circular patches of yellow over the dark asphalt. Through the window, Emily watched insects circling the lamps in slow spirals, as if they too were tired. Inside the diner, the red leather booths were empty, almost all of them. Only one person was still there, the last customer, sitting in the farthest booth, all the way in the back, near the side window where the streetlight barely reached. Emily had been watching the man for hours. He'd come in around 7 p.m., sat in silence, ordered just a coffee, and never touched the syrup or the sugar. The coffee went cold. She replaced it, then replaced it again. None of them had been touched. Sometimes men like that showed up, tired, defeated, alone. But this one was different. He didn't breathe like a tired person. He didn't sit like someone who wanted rest. He didn't look like he was waiting for anybody or watching anything. He simply existed there, still, like a statue. Behind the counter, Emily found herself wiping the same glass for the 5th time without noticing her hand had long stopped having any purpose. Her eyes stayed glued to the man's silhouette. "Sir?" she called softly, testing the sound of her own voice in that heavy silence. But the man didn't react. He was facing away from her, turned just enough for Emily to see part of his face, a hard, serious profile, older than her, maybe in his 50s. Grey hair, short beard, dark clothes, hands resting on the table as if he were about to say something, and never did. She took a deep breath. The jukebox had stopped hours ago. She couldn't even remember the last song it played. Emily checked the clock. 11:52 p.m. 5 minutes, Emily. Just 5 minutes and you close, she murmured to herself. But something inside her, that same instinct that had made her take in the girl with the little box weeks earlier, told her that locking the doors without understanding that man first would be a mistake, a serious one. Emily walked to the coffee machine, filled a fresh cup, breathed in the hot steam, and headed toward the last customer. Her footsteps echoed across the empty diner. Tack, tack, tack. With each step she was sure he'd move, or say something, or at least turn his head, but nothing. The cup trembled lightly on the tray. Not from lack of steadiness, she was steady, but from a nervousness she couldn't explain. She stopped 2 steps from the table. "Sir," she said, this time more firmly, "the restaurant is about to close. Can I help you with anything?" The answer took a long time. So long that Emily began to think she was talking to someone asleep with his eyes open. She'd seen that before. Exhausted truckers, night shift workers, people who slept with their eyes fixed. But then the man moved only one muscle, the index finger of his left hand, slowly, sliding millimeters across the table, as if waking up one part of his body but not the rest. And then, finally, he turned his face. His eyes were so dark that for a second she thought she was seeing the reflection of the night, not someone's iris. "You," he murmured. His voice came out hoarse, scratched, as if unused for days. Emily swallowed. "Me?" The man took a deep breath, like it cost him enormous physical effort. "You look like her." A chill ran up Emily's neck. "Like who?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the full cup Emily was holding, and his eyes changed, softened, became more human. "Like my daughter." Emily drew in a slow breath. "Your daughter, is she okay?" His eyes drifted toward some invisible point in the corner of the table. "No," the word came out sharp. "She's not." Emily felt her skin prickle. It wasn't unusual for someone to walk in carrying pain, but there was something about the way he said it, something twice as heavy. "Sir." "Thomas," he interrupted without lifting his head. "My name is Thomas." Emily nodded. "All right, Thomas. Do you want to talk about it?" He turned his face slowly. Now his eyes weren't just dark, they were full. full of guilt that seemed to spill from his pupils across the rest of his face. "Emily," he said, calling her by name even though she hadn't introduced herself. "Can I ask you a favor?" The tray shook again. This time she nearly dropped the cup. "How do you know my name?" Thomas smiled for the first time, a short, crooked smile that looked more like pain than joy. "It's on your name tag." Emily looked down at her chest. It was. She felt stupid, but also relieved. "Right," she said, forcing a smile back. "Sorry, long night." "For me too." Emily set the cup gently on the table, moved the tray aside and clasped her hands in front of her. "What's the favor, Thomas?" He took a deep breath. "Just sit with me for a moment." Emily blinked. It was a simple request, but the way he said it made it sound like something much bigger, as if that empty chair beside him were the last safe place in the world, or the most dangerous. "It's all right," he added, maybe noticing her hesitation. "I just don't want to be alone when I say this." "You say what?" Emily shifted her weight, looked around. The diner was empty, pure silence, nothing but her, Thomas, and the feeling that the air was trying to warn her about something. She pulled the chair back slowly, sat down. "There," she said quietly. "I'm here. You can talk." Thomas rested his elbows on the table and covered part of his face with his hands, like someone preparing to break something inside themselves. "Emily?" "Yes? Sometimes, when the last customer leaves." "What's left is only the truth." Emily froze. Thomas lowered his hands, and then he said, "I came here because tonight I need to tell mine." He took a deep breath, looking straight into her eyes. "Before midnight." Emily felt a cold wave rise from the floor up to her chest. "Why before midnight?" Thomas looked toward the window, toward the empty street, as if guarding something. "Because after that time, someone always arrives too late." And Emily, without knowing why, believed him completely. The clock struck 11:56 p.m. when Thomas finally lifted his face and looked at Emily with a firmness that completely contrasted with the heavy silence around them. It was the expression of someone who had rehearsed a confession for so long he no longer knew how to carry it. Emily kept her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't want to interrupt. It felt like any word could break the last emotional barrier holding Thomas together. He took a deep breath, as if searching for air in a place where it no longer existed. "Emily, I didn't come here by accident," he said. "It wasn't a mistake stopping at this diner, and it wasn't a coincidence that you were on shift." Emily felt the back of her chair turn cold. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Thomas dragged a hand down his tired face and finally took a sip of the coffee she had brought him. It was still hot. The steam rose and brushed the skin beneath his eyes. I come here every year," he said, his voice slow and heavy. "Same day, same time. And I always wait until the diner is empty." Emily frowned. "Every year. Why?" Thomas looked at the clock on the wall. The ticking second hand seemed to be fighting to move forward. 11:57 p.m. "Because this is where the last good thing in my life happened," he murmured. "And it's also where I lost everything." Emily felt her throat tighten. He went on. "My daughter, the one I told you that you remind me of, her name was Sophie." The name hit the air like a weight. Emily leaned forward just a bit, trying to show she was there. Really there. "Sophie, she was beautiful," he continued. "Dark hair, a smile that showed up too fast, like she was in a hurry to light up the room. She loved two things more than anything in the world: stories and pancakes, especially the blueberry pancakes from here, from Maple Route." Emily looked around, almost expecting to see the memory forming between the empty tables. "She used to come here with me all the time," Thomas said, letting out a small, fleeting smile. "Every Friday night. It was our ritual. She was 8. Emily held her breath. The smile vanished from his face. "Until one night, I ruined everything." Emily swallowed hard. "What happened?" Thomas lowered his gaze to his hands. They trembled, barely noticeable. I started working too much. Just a phase, I told myself. Just one more contract, one more project, one more trip. Always just one more thing. The problem is, children don't wait. They grow up while we're too busy to notice. Emily felt a sting in her chest. The sentence cut like a blade. Sophie started coming here less, he continued. First, because I arrived late. Then because I didn't arrive at all. Then because I stopped promising anything. And the day I finally decided to keep my promise, she wasn't here to wait for me anymore. A chill crawled up Emily's arms. What do you mean, she wasn't here? Thomas went silent. A silence that lasted too long. Then he inhaled and said, Sophie disappeared. The word echoed through the diner. Emily instinctively raised a hand to her mouth. My God, when? 9 years ago, Thomas replied. Exactly 9 years. Same day, same time. Emily's stomach clenched. She glanced again at the clock. 11:58 p.m. Thomas continued. That night, she asked to come here. I was running late, as always. My wife, ex-wife, called me 10 times. I ignored them. I'm on my way, I said, but I wasn't. And Sophie, she decided to walk here with a friend. 2 blocks, just 2 damn blocks. He tapped his fist lightly on the table, a gesture that sounded more like regret than anger. When I got here, he said, she was already gone. Both of them gone. Emily felt her heartbeat spike. The cameras, she asked quietly. Thomas let out a frustrated sigh. Both cameras weren't working that night. Coincidence, they said. A short circuit. I heard the word coincidence so many times that day I grew to hate every syllable of it. He took another breath. Since then, I come here every year, same time, because it was the last place Sophie tried to meet me, and I failed her. Emily's eyes stung, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. Thomas, I'm so sorry. Don't be. It changes nothing. He gave her a sad, crooked smile. I deserve all of this. Every empty night. Every minute alone, every time I stare at that door hoping, even though I know she won't walk through it. Emily couldn't help it. She touched his hand. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, accepting the gesture like someone receiving both a burden and a relief. But tonight, he said, looking at her again, tonight is different. Emily swallowed. Different? How? Thomas turned his head toward the window. The street outside was deserted. Only streetlights lit up a space that felt too empty for that hour. Because, he murmured, I found out something I couldn't keep to myself any longer, and I needed to tell someone before midnight. Emily felt her heart pound harder. 11:59 p.m. Thomas turned back to her, his expression a mix of fear, pain, and urgency. Emily, my daughter's disappearance. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't coincidence. And it wasn't strangers. The silence that followed dropped like a stone. What do you mean? Emily whispered, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. I know who took Sophie from me. Emily parted her lips to speak, but before she could ask anything, the second hand clicked forward. 12 a.m. And as if obeying an invisible cue, the diner door made a soft click. The doorknob began to turn, and someone, or something, walked in. The door opened so slowly that the sound seemed to scrape against the silence filling the diner. Emily turned her head instantly, her heart pounding in her chest. Thomas, on the other hand, didn't move at all. It was as if he already knew exactly what was about to happen. The figure that walked in didn't look threatening at first glance. A man, tall, thin, wearing a dark overcoat whose hem nearly brushed the floor. His face was partially hidden by his hat, but it was clear he wasn't young. There was something hardened there, something that didn't match the slow way he walked. He didn't look like someone entering a restaurant. He looked like someone entering a place he already knew. Emily instinctively took a step back. The man approached without hurry until he stopped at the last table, the one where Thomas sat. You're late, Thomas said, his voice low and almost rough. The man lifted his chin. Now Emily could see his face better, deep lines around the eyes, a tired expression, unshaven beard. It wasn't a cruel face, but it was a face carrying guilt. The stranger spoke. I told you I'd come when I was ready. Emily drew a deep breath, trying to make sense of it. You two know each other, she asked. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, as if the question hurt more than it should. We do, the man replied. We've known each other for a long time. Then he looked straight at Emily. My name is Richard. Emily didn't answer. She just stared at him, trying to decide whether she should feel afraid or not. Thomas clasped his hands on the table, trying to keep them steady. "Emily, this is the man I told you about," Thomas said, forcing the words out. "The man who knows what happened to Sophie." Emily felt a shock run through her body. She looked at Richard, the man with the slow steps and heavy eyes, and noticed his posture shift slightly, as if he were ready to confess something he had buried for years. "It's true," Richard said. "I know." Emily tightened her grip on the order pad beside her. It was the only object within reach, but somehow it made her feel a little safer. Emily began, but her voice cracked. "Were you involved in her disappearance?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He looked at Thomas with such deep regret, it seemed the air around him grew heavier. I never touched your daughter, Thomas. Never. But I saw things I should have told you about that day, and I didn't." Thomas pressed his lips together, like he was holding back an explosion. But he said nothing. He wanted to hear it. He needed to hear it. Richard turned to Emily again, as if silently asking for permission to continue. "I worked here," he said. "I was the manager back then. I knew every customer who came in, every camera that was installed, every shift change. And that night," his voice faltered, "that night I was a coward." Emily didn't blink. Richard continued. "The cameras didn't fail by accident like they told you. They were shut off, and I saw who did it." Thomas clenched his fists. "You knew from the beginning," he said. "Why the hell didn't you say anything?" Richard swallowed hard. "Because I was afraid. Because I thought it would just be a scare. Because I believed that if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't go too far." Emily felt a knot rise in her throat. "Who turned off the cameras, Richard?" she asked. Richard took a deep breath, like someone diving into freezing water. "A new employee, a guy named Ian Mercer." The name dropped between them like a weight. "He had only worked here for 3 weeks, Richard explained. "Quiet, odd, but always very interested. He asked too many questions about schedules, about who came in with kids, about how the storage area worked, about the back exits. I thought he was trying to learn the job, or that he was just curious." Thomas slowly shook his head, a movement full of restrained anger. "The night Sophie disappeared," Richard continued, "I found him near the camera panel, and he left through the storage door right after, like he was sneaking out." He squeezed his fingers together. "I should have called the police right then. I should have told everyone." He lowered his head. "But I let it go. I didn't want trouble. I was tired. It was late. And the next day, well, you already know what happened." Emily leaned against the counter. She felt the impact of his confession shake her entire body. Thomas spoke with a hoarse voice. "And where is this Ian now?" Richard closed his eyes for a moment. "I saw him yesterday," he said, "right nearby." Emily froze. He walked past Maple Root, stopped, looked inside like he was searching for something or someone. A shiver ran up Emily's arms. "He came back?" she asked. "Yes," Richard replied, "and not by accident. He always comes back. He shows up around here once a year, around this same time. He's looking for something he left behind." Thomas looked at Emily, and for the first time there was real fear in his eyes. "Sophie," he whispered. "Do you think he's still after her?" Richard took a breath. "I don't know," he said, "but I think he's after you." Thomas froze. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. "Why? Why would he be after me?" Thomas asked, his voice breaking. Richard took one step closer. "Because," he said, hesitating, "you don't know everything. You only know half the story." Emily felt her legs weaken. Richard looked at Thomas, and his eyes grew moist. "Thomas, that night, Sophie didn't come here just to meet you." He paused. "She came to leave something for you." "What?" Thomas asked, desperate. Richard lowered his head. "A letter!" Thomas went pale. "What letter?" Richard looked up, and desperation flickered in his expression, a desperation only someone drowning in guilt could show. "The letter she asked me to keep safe, and the one I lost." Emily placed a hand over her chest. Thomas went completely still, as if all the air had been punched out of him. "I never found that letter again," Richard whispered. "But someone did." He swallowed. "And that someone was Ian." Emily felt her blood turn cold. The clock struck 12:07 a.m. A thick silence settled over the diner, as if something were listening to every word. And then, from the back door, came a sharp sound. Clack! As if someone had just unlocked something. All three of them turned at the exact same time. Someone was back there, and they weren't alone. The sound from the back door, that sharp, metallic clack, so dry and final, sliced through the air like a silent warning. Emily felt her stomach twist. Thomas shot to his feet so fast, the chair scraped across the floor with a harsh drag. Richard went pale, his hands starting to tremble. None of them had to say a word. They knew. Someone was inside the restaurant. Emily took a deep breath, trying not to panic. Did you guys lock the back door?" she asked, her voice unsteady. Richard rubbed his face. "I locked the front one up, but the back, He wouldn't have come in if it were locked," Thomas said, already walking slowly toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. Emily rushed to him and grabbed his arm. "Thomas, you don't know who's there. You don't know what he's capable of." Thomas stopped, turned to her, and in that moment, Emily saw the fear sitting deep in his eyes, but she also saw something stronger. Guilt. "Emily, if it's him, if it's Ian, I need to know. I need to end this today." Richard came right behind them, breathing fast. "I'm going with you," he said. "I can't run from this again." Emily swallowed hard, and even though her heart protested, she nodded and followed them. The three walked into the kitchen, almost completely dark. The only light came from the hallway, stretching their shadows long and distorted across the tiled floor. Thomas stopped in front of the door to the storage room and signaled the others to stay back. He opened it slowly. Silence. The room was empty, but something was wrong. A small wooden box on the floor, as if someone had dropped it there in a hurry. Emily stepped closer, bending down. "This wasn't here before," she murmured. Richard knelt, touched the box, and pulled it toward him. It was far too light to be dangerous. "There's something written here," he said, pointing to the top. Emily leaned in. There was a single word carved into the wood, deep and uneven, scratched by hand. "Thomas." Emily's blood ran cold. Thomas knelt beside Richard and ran his fingers over the letters, as if touching a ghost. "He left this for me," Thomas whispered. "Or to provoke you," Richard replied. Emily stood still, breath caught in her chest. "Thomas," she said softly, "do you think this is from Sophie?" He hesitated, took a breath. "I don't know, but I have to open it." Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take it slow." Thomas nodded, slipped his thumbs under the lid, and lifted it. Emily instinctively held her breath. Inside there was only one object, a child's bracelet, small, pink, clear beads catching the light, and in the center a tiny oval charm with an engraved letter S. Thomas covered his mouth, choking on a sob. Emily felt tears burn her eyes. Richard turned away as if the sight was too much. "It's hers," Thomas whispered. "I gave this to her on her 8th birthday." Emily touched his shoulder carefully. Thomas closed the lid with a slow, heavy movement. "He got in," he said, panic rising beneath his voice. "He was here. He walked right past us while we were talking." "But why?" Emily asked. "Why leave this? Why now?" Richard exhaled shakily, bracing himself on the wall. "Because he's sending a message," he said. "He's always played with Thomas, always wanted a reaction, a chase, a surrender. It's like a game to him." Emily felt her face heat with anger. "A game? He kidnapped a child? How is that a—" But she cut herself off when she heard it. Not a loud noise, a small one, subtle, a soft click, followed by a gentle thud. Thomas lifted his head instantly. He knew that sound. "Oh God," he whispered. "That's—" Richard's eyes widened. "The freezer door," he murmured. Emily spun around. The heavy industrial freezer door, the one that was hard to open even on purpose, was slightly ajar. Just a crack, but it hadn't been like that moments earlier. Thomas walked toward it, almost in a trance. Each step seemed heavier than the last. Emily followed automatically. Richard lagged behind, feet dragging like they were glued to the floor. Thomas stopped at the door. Cold air escaped through the opening, brushing their ankles like icy fingers. "If he's in there," Emily whispered, "this is a trap." Thomas took a breath. "What if it's Sophie?" he said. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. Irrational, impossible. But who there had certainty about anything? Richard finally stepped closer. "I'll open it," he said. Thomas hesitated, then let him. Richard gripped the freezing metal handle, took a deep breath, and pulled. The door opened with a low rumble. Inside, the freezer glowed with a bluish light, cold, spectral. The supply boxes were stacked as always. The shelves gleamed. The floor reflected everything. And at the back of the freezer, too, something was there. Emily's hand flew to her throat. A shadow, thin, still, pressed against the wall as if waiting. Richard stepped forward, Thomas right behind him. Emily held her breath. As they got close, the shadow gained shape. Another wooden box, smaller than the first, even simpler, with another carved word on top. This time, open. Richard looked at Thomas. The choice is yours. Thomas reached out. Emily closed her eyes for a second. Richard held his breath. Thomas opened the box. Inside there was only a note, a single sentence written with disturbingly careful letters. You are close. A shiver shot up Emily's spine. Richard let out a hopeless murmur. He's playing with us. Thomas stared at the note for long seconds until a new expression, something between fury, determination, and despair, spread across his face. Enough, he said. I'm going after him. Emily grabbed his arm. Thomas, don't do this alone. He didn't answer. He turned and walked out of the freezer, steps sharp and determined. Richard looked at Emily, genuine fear in his eyes. He's going after Ian, he said, and if Ian wants him to, that means one thing. Emily felt the world tighten around her. What? Richard answered, voice breaking. That Thomas might not come back. Thomas walked slowly down the dark street, his coat catching the cold dawn wind. The words from the note, you are close, pounded in his head. Every step brought back a memory. Sophie laughing at the counter, blowing pancake crumbs with that crooked smile, the way she played with her hair when a story grabbed her. Now all of that lived inside a silence far too big. Emily and Richard stayed in the restaurant's storage room, watching the door close behind him. Emily felt a strange pressure in her chest, a mix of fear and hope. They had a choice. Chase after Thomas, call the police, run through the neighborhood. They chose to call. Richard grabbed his phone with trembling hands and dialed the number he knew well. The voice on the other end answered in the familiar grave tone. A patrol car was sent to the area, requested quietly, but requested. Meanwhile, Thomas walked a few blocks toward the old rail line that ran alongside the highway. According to Richard, Ian always spent time around those parts. Empty places, warehouses, abandoned transport lines where no one ever went. Thomas knew those tracks from the old walks he used to take Sophie on when he wanted to show her old train cars with faded, peeling paint. Now the railway felt darker, but still familiar. In the distance, a figure appeared under the flickering streetlight. Someone standing beside a shipping container, as if waiting for him. Thomas walked faster, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he recognized the silhouette. Thin, dark coat, tilted hat. It was Ian. Ian didn't react abruptly. He stayed frozen until Thomas was only a few steps away. Then he finally spoke, without lifting his head. You came. His voice was low, almost tired. There was no triumph, no arrogance, just exhaustion and a weight that felt ancient. Where is she? Thomas didn't soften the words. They came out dry, controlled. Ian lifted his eyes, and for a moment his face seemed smaller, not from fear, but from realizing something beyond repair. She's alive, Ian said. I didn't kill her. I would never do that. Thomas felt his breath catch, relief and pain tangling together. His jaw tightened until it hurt. Then why did you take her? He demanded. Ian stepped back, as if the questions were stones thrown hard. I thought I was protecting her. The confession came out blunt, unpolished. I thought that if I took her away from the place that was hurting her, I could give her the time she needed. I hid her. It wasn't right. I left her somewhere safe, with someone who would care for her. But then I lost my way, and he showed up. The man with the cold eyes, the one who wanted her for something I don't understand. I tried to take back control. I failed. Thomas felt anger rise, a bitter wave. How could you decide that? How could you think you had that right? Before Ian could respond, headlights lit the rails. Two blue lights appeared at the end of the street like solemn eyes. The patrol car Richard had requested approaching carefully. A second later, another car pulled up. Richard's old sedan with Emily behind the wheel. They had followed as fast as they could. The officers got out, surrounding the container with steady professional calm. One of them, Sergeant Leal, recognized Thomas from the description and approached, firm-voiced, asking everyone to stay calm and explain. Ian cooperated. The man who had once dodged every question now spoke openly, offering fragmented details about where Sophie had been left. A house in a far-off neighborhood, run by an elderly woman named Mother Agda, who had sheltered runaway children for years. Ian described the way there, apologized, and seemed for the first time ready to accept that he had done wrong. The police organized quickly. 2 cars headed straight to the address Ian had given. Another stayed behind to ensure no one fled. Thomas, who until then had wanted to force answers out of Ian, felt his legs weaken. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder, a small gesture but full of human warmth. The trip was quick and quiet. At the house, the old fence creaked, and a white-haired woman opened the door. When she saw Thomas, her hands trembled. She brought out the girl who'd been inside, small, older than the image Thomas had kept in his mind, with eyes that flickered between fear and curiosity. And then, when she heard her father's name, something happened. The protective mask she'd built cracked for a second, and she ran. Thomas didn't believe that fragile body could be his Sophie until she leaped into his arms, burying her face in the chest that remembered the smell of pancakes and the warmth of bedtime stories. There were signs of rough times, eyes trained by fear, but she was alive. Alive. The reunion was quiet and absolute. No screaming, no spectacle. Just the warmth of an embrace, muffled sobs, and a silence that said more than words. The police asked for calm, took quick practical statements. Ian was taken in for questioning, not as a murderer, but as a man who had made a terrible choice. There were lines of responsibility to be sorted out. There were formal questions. Who was the man with cold eyes? How did Mother Agda's protection network work? And above all, how to return Sophie safely to a normal life. On the way back to the maple route, Thomas held Sophie's hand as if it might break if he let go. She watched him closely, with a mix of distrust and need. Emily and Richard followed behind, quiet and respectful. The street seemed brighter, the early morning less heavy. Back at the diner, before anything truly settled, Sophie asked for a pancake, blueberry the way she'd always loved it. Thomas smiled for the first time in years, and Emily prepared it with hands that knew the rituals of care. Nothing rushed the return to normalcy. The process would be long. Explanations, therapy, constant presence, rebuilding trust. But in those warm bites and the soft talk between father and daughter, there was the start of something worth holding on to. Ian was taken in. The police promised to investigate the man with cold eyes, dig through connections, search for other possible victims. Richard gave every detail he could, carrying the weight of guilt, though softened by finally telling the truth. That early morning, as the first shaky light crept through the windows, the Maple Root diner held more than the smell of coffee. It held the echo of returning footsteps, reunited voices, and the quiet strength of human care. Thomas, sitting at the same table where the night had begun, held Sophie's hand while she ate slowly and murmured, "I promise, never again." Emily watched, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, knowing that promises don't erase guilt, but they can make continuing possible. And there, among utensils, plates, and long stories, the last customer went home. But this time different, accompanied, safe, with the night finally offering a new beginning. The diner closed, as it always did, but this time the doors shut on something being reborn.